got you a good old four-wheel drive right there, and dang, I'll tell you what, that's some bitch you climb a mountain around. Woo-wee, I bet that go anywhere. Some bitch. Look at it, old dang fender, man. That down, all that clearing, man. Bouncing, wheeling, you know. Yeah, I used to have me a Jeep. Well, yes, sure.
Hey, thanks for checking out the channel, checking out the video. In this video, I'm going to show you how I built Highlines for my 2003 TJ that I have sitting behind me here. Usually when I make a video, I do it in chronological order, meaning I make my intro as I start the project. I bring the camera with me along every step of the way. And I did that in this video, but now I'm filming an intro because I don't want to waste your guys' time. There's a lot of things I did that I didn't like. So I'm gonna show you what I did. And then if you're still interested, you can keep watching the video and follow all the steps that I did to build this. So I'm gonna pull you off the stand. I'm gonna point out some things on the Jeep and show you what the fenders look like, and kind of point out some of the things I don't like, some of the things I do like, some of the things I would have done different. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, like I said, this is my 2003 Jeep TJ Wrangler. Now, I started this Highline fender project because I wanted to fit these 35s on with no lift, and I accomplished that. It looks great, it drives amazing. You know, I have a lot of stuff planned for this Jeep in the future. This was just the first step. So right now it's sitting on stock axles. That's temporary. I'll run the 35s for a couple of years. Eventually it'll be on 39s. If you've been following the channel or following me on Instagram, you kind of probably know where I'm heading with this Jeep. But one of the key factors in making this work was the Highlines, and I didn't want to spend the $1,200 to $1,600 on professionally built ones, and I built my own. The flip side of that is it's obvious that I built these myself. There's a lot of flaws. They look really good from like 10 feet away, but when you get up close, you know, you can see some of my bad welds and some of the stuff I should have done different. Now, the cool thing is it did give me a lot of clearance. So this is stock lift, and I mean, that's a lot of clearance. I'll be able to flex out with these 35s and not rub. In a couple clips, you will see me flex the Jeep out with the 31s and stock fenders, and I take some measurements, and then I'm gonna grab the forklift in a little bit, and we're gonna do the same test with the 35s and see how much clearance I got. So what I did here is I took the factory fender, I trimmed it, I cut a bunch off, I moved it up 3 1/4 inches, and I built a tube that comes off of a custom made bracket that comes around and ties back into the body. It looks kind of dingy right now because I tried wiping it off. It's dirty. I've been using this Jeep, but now it's got a bunch of lint on it from the rag, but that's okay. You have to cut the hood with this project. I used some sheet metal edging. I don't like how that turned out. I'm gonna find some different edging because you got some bumps and bracing on the inside that makes putting that on hard. My welds turned out really bad, so I tried bondoing them, which doesn't look great either, but I did learn a lot. I learned a lot with this project. So the next thing I'm going to show you is a weld on this side versus the other side. Try not to judge me. I am not a welder. I'm still learning. This is one of my first, well, I mean, I've done a lot of big projects now, but this is a big project that I wasn't quite prepped for, and I learned a lot with it. So remember, no judgment here. Here's the weld on this side that I didn't cover up yet. It's real globby, real boogery. This plate bolts through the factory fender. Let's go over to the other side and I'll show you just kind of how my welds improved. Now, these welds were a lot better than the other side, but I still covered them up just to be uniform. And I still need to paint this fender, of course. But, I mean, that weld turned out a lot better. So I'm really, really happy with the driver's side. I ended up with less of a curved angle here as well. You know, ideally I would have matched side to side, but what really matters is from the front, it looks uniform. It does look a little off right now just because one's not painted. but they sit pretty level to each other. I built these little flares just out of a piece of rectangle tube or sheet, I guess, and I welded that on and shaped it how I liked, and then I matched the angle on the other side. Same thing with this. I built a bracket. I just traced it out with cardboard first and then cut it out with a angle grinder. I added some bracing inside there. You can see it, there it goes. And that's bolted to the old fender and welded on this side. So these flares actually, you can unbolt them and take them off if you need to. Now this side I ended up with a lot more sloped of an angle. The original plan was to build one sheet that came down, and that just didn't work. So I ended up having to cut 2 rectangle sheets, trace them out how I wanted, do lots of trimming and cutting to get them to fit to make my top plates. I added hood pins on this project. My original clamps, they would have worked. You would have had to drill some new holes, but I broke one of it. But I broke one of them taking it off, and I just decided to go with hood pins. I also have a video of those being installed. All right, so in a minute, you're gonna see me talk about some of the obstacles to installing Highlines on your TJ, whether you build your own, whether you do the AEV style factory fender raise, or buy pre-made ones. So now I'll point out those obstacles and show you how I remedied those, and then they'll also be later in the video. But if you're not interested in doing this, then you don't need to watch the whole video. So you have your coolant lines or your AC lines. Those have to be bent up. I just did that by hand. I know it doesn't look great and could definitely use some work. Your PDC has to be moved. It originally bolts over here. I unbolted it. I hand bent the bracket and moved it in closer to this rod and rebolted it down for clearance. You will have a factory air box over here. I went with a cold air style. Now I'm going to build a box for around that. Your battery sits down there from the factory. You have to raise it up. To do that, I address it later in the video again, but to do that, you have to take the bracket that attaches to the tub of the Jeep and holds the fender on, and you have to cut it in half, raise it, and re-weld it for this to sit higher. And when you do that, the factory tie-down strap does not work. So I just cut a piece of flat metal, drilled a new hole down there for the J-hook bolt or J-bolt or whatever you want to call it, and reattach that, and it's in there really good. So that's kind of what you got going on the passenger side. On the driver's side, there's a few more things that are kind of in the way. From the factory, you have this transmission control module, and it sits upright, kind of like this, and it has its own bracket. I had to completely get rid of that bracket. There was no way it was fitting, and I just cut some flat pieces of metal and bent them in the vise over there with a hammer and rebolted it down, and it's nice and sturdy in there. I had to raise my control box for my switches. This area, you know, you kind of have a usable space here if you have something, maybe a control box or something else. And then for the windshield wiper fluid, you have a big box right here from the factory, and I replaced it with just this little stainless steel bottle. So you can see it's holding fluid. It works good. I mean, I need to come up with a better mounting idea than a zip tie, but I don't think it's going anywhere. And I just drilled a hole in the bottom of that bottle and was able to use the grommet and the motor from the factory stuff and plug it right in. The horn is in its factory spot. I just had to manhandle it and bend it down. You can see on this side, we have some bolts running through. When I trim my fender, I leave a little bit of a lip. You'll see that in the video. So on this side, I still need to put my bolts. I've already gotten started by taking off the plastic pocket style fender flare that was on there. I really don't like this style, and I want Highlines. So first I wanted to address kind of, there's two routes, you know, really that a lot of people take. And that's either you can move these factory fenders up no matter which way, you're going up to about this body line, and it looks like it's about 3 inches. So you can move this up, and it's the AEV style, and you retain this, which I went with different markers because I want this to be open. The other style is buying a complete new fender from a company like Moto-Built or something similar to that, which replaces all that. Either way, you have to cut the hood on this and move that fender up. So under the hood are a few obstacles, regardless of which option you choose, the AEV style with the factory fenders, or switching to a new fender, which will involve also adding a new inner fender well. So the first of which is this air box is going to be in the way. I think from what I've seen online, there's a few other options for factory style air filters. I already went ahead and addressed this by switching to a K&N. This is a 2.5 inch inlet. I cut my factory pipe and sleeved it with a piece of steel pipe. That works out well for me. I am going to be putting a pre-filter on there, and once I'm done with this project, I'm going to build some sort of splash / heat guard for around it so that I'm not getting a wet filter all the time. The next obstacle is going to be these coolant lines, or air conditioning lines. You have to bend those a little bit once you get this in place. You have your PDC in the way, so I've seen a lot of people take this off the bracket or modify the bracket to fit on whatever style, you know, either back on these or with the new inner wheel well. And then your battery is a big one. It needs to be up. If you look down in there, it sits on top of a bracket, and that bracket can be modified or changed. There are a few companies that make brackets that hug the tub a little more and can move that. If you're willing to go with like an AGM battery, that's going to make things a lot easier because you can tilt and move that battery around however you need it. This is a newer battery. It came with the Jeep, so I want to retain that. I think I should be able to just move that up into this area and it'll be a tight fit, but I think I can make it work looking at pictures online. And then on your driver's side, you have some similar obstacles. Your washer bottle, which I've seen people either use a smaller one and move it towards the back, or I've seen a few people fit this one in here, and I'm hoping I can do that. I have my McTuning switch panel control, so I'll have to remount that. You got some other miscellaneous stuff mounted to this inner well, and I believe this is the control for the automatic transmission. That is in the way. Your horns, all that stuff's gonna have to be disconnected and moved to accommodate this fender coming up. And this is what the battery tray looks like, you know, pretty close, at least on the other side. You have a bracket that attaches to your tub, and then it comes forward and attaches to the inside of the fender here. So I'm hoping I can modify those brackets to be able to move this up. The style that I'm choosing, I didn't want to spend $1,200+ on aftermarket fenders. There are some cheaper options that involve bolting to your factory fender, and that's kind of the route I'm taking. I'm not buying anything. I bought steel, so I'm gonna try to make these myself. I'm considering it kind of like a hybrid style, where I am gonna move my factory fender up to that point that it needs to be, and then I'm gonna trim it. So somewhere about in here, I'll cut this front piece off, I'll trim this flat, and then I have some steel that I picked up. I'll build a new mount bracket here, and I'll have a tube that comes out. This fender will attach to that tube. The tube is going to come out further. These are 31s on a factory suspension right now. The end goal with this Jeep is 39s, and I'm hoping to achieve that with as little lift as possible. For now, I'm hoping to put 35s on here without having to do any more lift other than the body lift that I have on there and the Highline conversion. With that said, I will also be going to wider axles, hopefully in the near future. I already have a set to build. So I'm going to throw the 35s on these wheels for now. And then once I'm done building those axles and can put them in here with my lift, I will also use those 35s on different wheels. And all that's to say that this is going to be a bit wider than it is now. The build as it is right now, I want that steel tube to come out probably a little bit past where this tire is currently, and hopefully that doesn't look too goofy. Be similar, the pocket styles were right flush with it, so I might go a little bit over that. That way when I get in my bigger axles, I don't have too much tire poking out. My biggest concern with doing this hybrid style is this plate right here. I like the hybrid style because I don't have to worry about trying to build an inner wheel well. It's already there. I might change my mind once I start digging into that. I might start from scrap and do a full-on steel fender. But if I can use some of this, I think that would be nice. The biggest obstacle is going to be that it would be nice if this was further back. You know, you look at a lot of Highlines and they terminate right down here somewhere instead of all the way up here. So one of the things I wanted to address before I got started was the flex. My goal with this is that once I'm done, once the Highline is on there with the 35s, I will have the same amount of up travel and be able to turn lock to lock and not have any issues without being stretched, without changing the factory suspension. There is a chance that I might have to put a leveling kit on it. You know, that includes just a little 2-inch spacer there. And when you are sitting on level ground, it is nose down a bit. So for right now, I want to flex this Jeep out as much as I can. I got my brother's forklift here. So I'm gonna flex that out with the sway bar connected, measure it, and then I'm gonna disconnect the sway bar and measure it again and see if I have any interference. All right, let's go ahead and flex this out. All right, really, that's not bad at all. So with the sway bar connected, we got 3 7/8 maybe above the tire, 4 5/8 behind the tire. I'll measure from this outside edge of that tire to the ground, right at 23 inches. And I got the back, I pulled the tire off the ground and then set it gently back down on the ground. So 23 inches of travel with that factory sway bar connected, which retains some clearance there. The sway bar is disconnected. That made noticeable difference. For one, it closed up that gap on top. Not even worth measuring. 1.25 inches. Measure down roughly the same spot. It's not perfect because I'm in a gravel driveway. So 29 5/8 is what I'm getting. Check that out. I am touching on the bump stop in there, factory bump stop. That looks good, huh? All right, it's time to start cutting, or at least remove this fender. I think that's my next step. I did put some tape on there and started tracing out some lines. I traced out this line. It's kind of just straight diagonal up from the inner part here. I put these pieces of tape on. I saw a trick online about marking your holes on here, and then when you put it, you can transfer it to here. Should make drilling the new holes on this side easier once I get to that point. So as far as removing all my obstacles, which I need to do first, it looks like we have a few nuts and bolts under here for the intake box. I think this just slides off for now. You got 4 bolts in here that hold the fender to a little bracket in there. Then there'll be some bolts in here on the inside, 3 I think. Pull the battery out. I gotta move that, and then I'll have a better idea what I'm looking at. So I pulled the clips on this PVC here and pulled that right off. You'll also have to deal with some of these like Christmas tree clips that holds wiring harness in. Pulled the battery tray out that sits right there, and there's also what looks like a vacuum box sitting down there. And that's probably the bolt for this. So one more thing to keep an eye out on this side. All right, fender's off. This was a huge pain, stuck down in there. I had to fish it around that, and then the little rubber liner on the inside got hung up on everything, and I was still connected in a few spots. But other than that, came right off. Now here's the part where I'm trying to make up my mind, because you have this surface right here. So do I just want to start from scratch and put a piece of angle iron in there and start putting tubes off of it and running to the front? Or would it be better to repurpose that? So that's a good question. I think I'm going to go ahead and keep playing around with that idea. In the meantime, I'm going to take this off so I can have a little more access for putting that on and off as I make, you know, adjustments and figure out where I'll be cutting and whatnot. So I set the hood back down just for fun, and that looks kind of cool. Now I'm gonna take my straight edge and my Sharpie. I'm gonna get roughly to the center of that hole, and then I made a mark on my tape on the outside. So I'll do that for each hole. That way when I take my fender and I sit it back up there at its new body line, I can transfer this line over to the fender, and then I'll use the straight edge on that one to drill my new holes. So that way, drill new holes on the fender, and it should line up with these factory holes. Kind of a neat trick I saw online. So we're gonna try that, and I'm gonna get to cutting on that. Those cuts are made, just leaving just enough meat for my new panel to bolt on. So all right, so it's on there, you know, just set in place. There are some clearance issues in here that will need to be addressed. I think if I cut along this line that I drew, it'll clear. The hole for the access to the back of the headlight is right there, and they have a lip on it for structure reasons, I'm sure. As far as the front goes, I'm gonna need to build some sort of bracket here, you know, pretty level. I'm eyeballing it here. It's kind of all I can do. The Jeep's not sitting on perfectly level ground. They're tapered anyway, so I can't just put a level on it. So I'm eyeballing it, and the hood's not cut yet, so I can't put the hood down to get the right, you know, angle there. But as far as the back is concerned, you know, I got this body line right here, lines up almost perfectly with the top of that. You got a curve here and a curve here, and I think I have them lined up how I want. But here's those marks I made earlier. So now I'm just gonna transfer that line onto the fender side. Then when I pull the fender off, I'm gonna put a decent size hole, you know, new hole on the inside of the lip of this fender. That way I still have some adjustability when I put it back in. So now I'm gonna pull this off. I'll trim that, I'll add my holes, put it back on and see what it looks like. All right, it's time for the most stressful part of this whole project, and that's cutting the hood. So before I get to that point, I just wanna warn you, you're gonna wanna measure multiple times, eyeball it multiple times, but I'll turn you around and show you what I'm thinking here. So this is kind of how the fender's sitting so far. I got one bolt in the back. I think it's pretty much level. So what I did is took a straight edge, I held it in that crease right there, and I made a mark on this header panel here. I'm gonna take this fender off. I'll lay the hood back down. I already made a mark on this side of the hood that corresponds with that mark. It's a little bit above where this ends, so that I'll have a gap. And then I'll use like sheet metal trim. You know, you've seen like the little gasket stuff, kind of like this, but no weather stripping on it, just the gasket part. And that'll go on this sheet metal edge of the hood. Sorry if this video is so scattered, It's kind of how this process is going. So I held up this piece of cardboard, kind of just eyeballed it, and I will cut a chunk similar to this out of metal. And so when I'm done, I will sculpt a piece of metal for this that will, you know, bolt on here and using the factory ones, and that'll give me a spot to bring my tube off of. I have to be really careful. There's a few spots that have extra bracing. Other than that, it's just sheet metal. The front also has extra bracing. All right, the hood's down. Earlier I made this mark. It's like right on the body line. I transferred it to this side. I'll probably need to go a little bit up. Just gonna go ahead and go a little bit up. Okay, so I stuck a piece of tape on there, and I just want to point out, so this is 3 1/4 inches from where the top of the fender sat originally to having it at the top of that body line. 3 1/4 inches. That corresponds over here, 3 1/4 inches. But you can't just measure on the front and call it 3 1/4 inches. So when I did that, I measured 3 1/4 from the bottom of the hood up, and I got this mark right here. Then when I had the fender on there, I made another mark, and I transferred it out to the front, and it's about 1/4 to 1/2 inch even difference from this line that I made, that I measured, to this line. You're gonna want to keep that in the back of your head there, and err on the side of caution, right? You don't want to cut too much, but not cutting enough is okay, because you can always grab a flapper disc or make a second cut, you know, however many cuts you need to make it fit right. It's a lot easier than having to source another hood. So now I grabbed this piece of wood, and I am going to clamp it onto the hood here. I stuck some tape down, hopefully that's right on the cut line, and I'm going to clamp that as my straight edge. I'll draw a line and start cutting. Now there is a little bit more of a gap than I wanted, but everything's not exactly sitting where it needs to be anyway. So I'll be able to fine tune that out, I think. And like I said, I'm gonna put that strip along there anyway. In the back, I'm gonna need to sand down a little bit. Just when I put the hood down, this corner dug in a little bit. So just a little bit of a clearance there. This is getting cut off, this section out here. So on the front, you know, I had to trim a bunch of that away. There was the 3 holes that had this bracket in there that held it all in place. There's a little dip there on the factory fender itself. So I don't know if you can really see what I'm talking about. Oop. There's a hole here on the sheet metal of the inner fender well. And then there's a little divot, like a hole with a chunk cut out. And then the rest of the holes were up here. But that divot works perfectly on the second hole up. So I was able to align it with that and cinch it down. I mean, I'm still a long ways away from being done. I gotta sort out the battery box and support there and build my bracket in the front. But I think next I'll do that battery tray, get everything put back together. All right, now I'm addressing the PDC here. Bracket sat like this, and the hood definitely did not close. So the first thing I did was bend these tabs out a little bit to see if I could lower it, and it helped, but it didn't make enough of a difference. So now pulled the bracket off, and I am gonna move it into here, and I'm just gonna manhandle it until those holes are touching the metal. I'll drill some new holes and put some nuts and bolts in and move my PDC inward, nice next to this support rod here. I already tried it. The hood closes just fine. Here's how that bracket turned out. You could use the bolt and the nut on the other side. I had some rib nuts, so I put those in there. It's mounted nice. So now it's time to tackle that battery box. And looking at the bracket here, I'm not sure that there's a perfect way to go about it. I know I want this side because it's already angled and cut for around the tub. And I know I'm gonna want this at some point. So what I'm gonna do here is just cut along this line that I drew willy-nilly on there. Then I will put this side on. I'll put that down in there and kind of see where we're at. Everything is sitting in place. I got the battery in there, the PDC, room to run wires, like more room than I had before, which is nice. I don't know if this is the same size as a factory battery. It might be a little smaller. It works perfectly fine, but it's sitting in there how it's gonna sit. My only concern is how close it is to these connections. And you are definitely not gonna be able to use your factory battery tie down, because it sits like that. There's no way. I'll end up just cutting a piece of flat strap and drilling a new hole on the battery tray down there for the little J hook, so it sits up, and then it'll run across over to here. So I threw some paint on that bracket. I don't want to get too close because it's got some real boogery welds on it. My brother's welder is different than ones I've used, and I had it turned up too hot. I was blowing holes through it, but I got some decent tacks on it at least, and it doesn't, yeah, it'll hold. And then I added a piece of angle iron on that to connect the two. I was able to put that vacuum box back in there. It's just zip tied in place, so that's bolted on. I added a nut cert up here so that I could use all the mounting holes. I need to build my tubes. So to start with that, I'm gonna have this plate here. So I just traced it out with cardboard. I got it lined up close to the hood, and it runs down, and there's the factory nut certs here. I'll use that hole as the main bolt, so the bracket will kind of sit like that, and then have the bolts down the side. I'll have to, you know, trim this edge and sand it down with a flat disc probably, just to make it look good. And the main tube will come off somewhere right around where that T is at. I'm gonna take this and transfer it onto some steel and cut it out. All right, so I'm still working at it. I was able to use a piece of 1/8 inch steel plate, use that cardboard cutout, and I was able to cut and just bend by hand over the vise. Pretty nice looking bracket for that spot. So the tube will come off about right here. I do need to trim it a little bit, or the hood. Probably the hood, because you can see that inner lip in there sticking out. But that'll probably come on final fitment. So right now I'm getting ready to bend tube and still letting this fender dry. Just put a couple coats of paint on that. I'm not the best painter, or prepper at least. So as long as it looks good from like 10 feet away, I'm happy. I thought it was going all smooth, and I pulled it out to see if my measurement was right, and it looks like crap. Okay, so this fender project has been quite a project. It's taken a lot more time than I wanted. I finally figured out the bends, and what I was doing wrong is I was bending every 1/2 inch and only doing 5 pumps. So I ended up with a giant radius. I watched some YouTube videos and hacks on how to use this bender, and I changed to doing 20 pumps every 1 inch, and I got the radius as I wanted. So here's what we're looking at. I have some cardboard just sitting on there, just to give me an idea of the plates I'll cut. So here you can see my marks where I did, you know, 1 inch increments and bent it. You know, with these cheap benders, you get some marks and some scars and stuff, but it is an off-road rig. So I have it tacked into place on my bracket there. Comes out, there's a bend here, and then another bend here, then this bend, and it was kind of hard because, you know, I'm not, you know, using anything fancy to get my angles. I was kind of going just by feel. So in the back here, instead of being a 90 into the body, it kind of curves back a little bit. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but it slopes that way instead of going straight back, which at first I was like, ah, bummer, I messed up. But I actually really like that, especially after I put these panels in. It's not super noticeable, kind of gives it some dimension. Yeah, I like that. So I do need to cut it at the front. Down here I built a little plate that will bolt through the body here, or the fender here. So I posted some pictures of this online, got roasted pretty good about the fenders being so big. I'm gonna go ahead and let the internet change my mind. And I'm gonna trim out 2 inches and see how I like that look. I marked out 3 inches instead. And the issue with doing this, the thing to note and be careful of is, for one, I wanna match that angle so that it welds on right. So, but when I cut that, since this slopes back, it's gonna move the whole thing forward just slightly, maybe a 1/4 of an inch. And then same thing in the back. I had messed up this angle. So instead of being a 90-degree in, it slopes back. But I actually really love that I made that mistake, because I think it looks a lot better. But when I cut this, if you look at it, you know, I'm going to lose some elevation. So it might end up needing to be mounted up here instead of down here. And it's probably also going to need to move forward slightly. We'll see what happens. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these lines, and then I'll carefully cut off these. So if I want to, you know, weld that back on, it's possible. Then the other issue is this could actually come up a little bit anyway. So maybe this isn't a bad thing, because the way I cut the fender here, which I think is the right way to do it, it's actually not sitting level. So looking at that, you can kind of see is a little bit lower than it needs to be. All right, got that trimmed down. I got another layer of cardboard put on there just to give me an idea what it's gonna look like. It's important to remember, reminding myself here, as much as you, that, you know, my metal that I'm gonna be plating with is 1/16, and this cardboard is a lot thicker than that. Probably an 1/8 or 3/16 thick. So when I put my plate on there, it's gonna sit differently. I did have a problem up here where I had cut too much of that. So on the other side, maybe I'll leave a little bit more lip right there. All right, back at the never-ending fender project. I have made pretty good progress here on the passenger side. Yesterday, I went ahead and started putting the top plate on, and I forgot my SD card when I came up here to film it. So I'm just gonna walk you through what I did. But here's what we got going on so far. It's been raining, so now I got a bunch of surface rust to deal with. But I had my tube coming out, and I just cut a piece of metal from some flat strap I had and kind of curved it in there the way I like it. I think that looks pretty good. Massaged this with a hammer, and then I ground down all my welds because I'm not a very good welder, so I didn't want to leave them too exposed. And then for the top plate here, I just measured the widest point and the overall length, and I cut out a rectangle out of my 1/16 inch 4x8 sheet that I bought, and I set it on there and just started making lines and measurements. I ran my marker in around this edge, and then I just used a little saw to cut it out. And of course it took a lot of, you know, going back and grinding down and sanding down, and I ended up with this top piece that I'm pretty happy with. You know, you can't make these measurements, so when I do the other side, I'm gonna have to do the same method again. It's gonna be a little bit different. You know, of course I didn't get it like perfectly lined up here, but that's okay. You're not gonna see that with the hood closed. I'll run a bolt through here, and you know, 2 or 3 more along the front. I'm gonna tack it there, and then I'm gonna stitch weld this just here and there. Originally I was trying to make it out of one piece, so I cut a relief up here and I tried bending it down. I scratched up my fresh paint job pretty good here and there, so I'll probably mask this off and reshoot it as I'm painting this. But I ended up just using the same method as the top, measuring the widest point and the overall length, and I cut a second panel that will go down here. So now my tricky part is gonna be, I gotta trim this little ear off, and I gotta try to bend that down in such a way that this panel and that panel meet up to where it's weldable, and still looks good and matches that curve in there. So that's gonna be kind of a trick, but that's where I'm at now. I'm getting ready to some bolts in the top, and then before I weld anything, I want to get this part sorted out. But that's where I'm at. Put some bolts in, weld it up, and once it's welded and I'm happy with it, I'll pull that part back off. I'll prep it for paint and start shooting paint at it. So I went ahead and got some self-etching primer and some bed liner in our spray can. My thought there is my little imperfections in here, you know, where I nicked it with the hammer, or it's not, you know, quite smooth or level. The bed liner is a little more rough textured, so it's going to cover and fill those little pock marks a little bit better. But yeah, I'm really digging this top panel so far. I'm going to take my flapper disc and I'll go around the edge just slightly to try to make it, you know, uniform. And then down here I still have to trim this piece, but you know, making this angle is going to be the hardest part. So that's where we're at. Let's keep going. Well, I got some good tacks on there. Like I said, I'm not the best welder. I need to fine tune the welder, and I'm going to do some more practice before I start laying beads. But this is kind of what I'll be dealing with. I got a weld across here, and then I'm going to sand that smooth, and then I'm hoping I can do nice enough welds to leave it exposed on the stitch welds around the outside. I don't want to have to sand it down. I'd like to, you know, hopefully do something nice enough to keep. But from here to here will be welded, and then I'm just going to stitch weld the rest. I'll probably tap this down a little more to give it a better angle, but really that's not bad. It's going to be kind of funky looking right there because it's going to dive in. You know, once I do get my welds in, I can tap a little more and make that nice and smooth. I did grind that down. Progress report. I am not a good welder. I think I've said that a few times, but it's true. So when I tried to do my stitch welds, they turned out real boogery, which is frustrating because, well, I already threw it in the scrap pile. But when I did my practice welds on a piece of scrap tube and 1/16, I had some pretty good looking welds on there. Did not hold true when I went over to here. Jeremy recommended maybe, you know, sanding down the welds the best I could, but I went and got some, it's called glazing putty, Bondo brand glazing putty, and you're supposed to be able to, well, it's essentially Bondo, I guess. So I smeared it over my welds, and in a bit when it's dry I can sand on it and hopefully end up with something smooth. I think I also mentioned that earlier, but you know, the goal is, if it looks perfect from here, about 10 feet away, I'm happy with that. If someone wants to get up close and nitpick it, you know, I'm not a professional. I'm building stuff outside the garage just like, you know, a lot of the people that watch my channel are. So at the end of the day, if it looks decent and it saves me, you know, $1,000 by over buying Highlines, then I'll be happy. You know, I got some weird angles in it, like that one right there. It kind of slopes. I'll get you up closer. So you got a sharp edge here, and then it kind of tapers out to the edge, because this angle wasn't, if I would have brought this pipe further this way and had it a sharper angle, that would have been better. But I rolled with what I had going on, and I'm just fine with it. I think it looks just fine. So I'm waiting for that to dry so I can sand it. Once I'm pleased with that, I'll pull this off, take it over there and paint it. Right now, I thought I would just show you guys, I'm putting on this edging. You'll have to sand down this inner lip on the hood to clear whatever you got going on here like I did. This is just sheet metal edging I found on Amazon. All right, it's time for the after flex test. I apologize, it's very windy today. I already pulled it up on the forklift and flexed it out. I figured there's too much wind noise to drag you through all that. So this is what we get. Look at that. I mean, that looks like a proper Jeep right there. This is stock suspension, 1 1/4 inch body lift, custom Highlines. I mean, that's gotta be the same or more flex than the XJ had. So I had written down 29 5/8. And when I did that, I measured to the edge of the outside lug of one of those tires. We're on the gravel, so this isn't exactly perfect. The wind's blowing my tape around. Now we're looking at 31.5, 31 5/8, somewhere in there, just shy of 32. Pick a different spot and we'll verify that. I mean, that's the lowest edge, which is what I did last time. Yeah, almost to 32. So I gained flex. The bump stops are crying in there. They're touching hard. I got plenty of clearance around, you know, huge opening on this side. The only concerning spots, oh, Rocco pissed on my wheel again, is behind this. You can't really see it with the camera probably, but it's touching the front of the wheel well right here and maybe a little bit in the back. Sorry about the wind. Which won't be a problem in the future because I'm gonna, you know, cut that back to clear a bigger tire. Just a reminder, this is not its final form. This is just so I can have fun while I save up the funds for a bigger build. Then on this side, you know, of course it's looking good. You can see where it was rubbing when I took it up to that lookout tower, which, you know, was articulating okay on the snow. So it rubbed a little bit on the metal. It's touching over there right now. On the inner liner back here too, didn't touch on the metal back here. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That looks great. That is exactly why I needed Highlines. So stock suspension, 1 1/4 inch body lift, and 35s. And I forgot to flex it out in the rear last time, but that's what it looks like. You know, it's not actually touching the metal right now, but you know, conditions are a little bit different when you're off-road and you're aired down and things are moving around. So pretty happy with that. This gives me a new idea too of, you know, what it looks like to have to trim one of these to fit your big tire in that wheel well. Looks pretty freaking awesome. Full bump stop on this side. You know, it's not touching up in there. I am curious. Can't safely do it on the forklift with how I have the fork set up, but I am curious to see, you know, if I was turned, if it's gonna get into that wheel well, you know, turned and at full stuff. So we'll just have to wait and see what it's like when we're actually wheeling on a trail. But I think this is a great start. Come in the shop, try to give you a break from the wind noise. So yeah, that project is done. It has paint on it, it's ready to go. That passenger side where the welds look kind of ugly, I'll probably sand that down and clean it up a little bit at some point. But right now I'm in crunch mode. This project took me way longer than I thought it would. And we are getting ready we have less than 2 weeks, like a week and a half until our wheeling trip back to North Idaho, where we're gonna put this Jeep to the test on the 35, so stay tuned for that. In the upcoming videos, I have quarter armor going on and some affordable off-road rock sliders. I did plan on building my own rock sliders, but like I said, I ran out of time. So at the end of the day, this was a pretty big project for me. I am about 90% pleased with how it turned out. You know, I keep having to remind myself, this is not a show rig. This is a trail rig / daily driver. And you know, while I want it to look good and cool, it's also important that I save money, because, you know, bashing a $1,600 set of fenders off of a rock is gonna hurt a lot more than scraping these that I have less than, I found my receipt the other day, it was $240 for the tube, the plate, and some miscellaneous metal. The rest of the metal I used was just scrap I had laying around. If you're gonna attempt a project like this, you know, heed my warning. It is a pretty labor-intensive project. I scratched my head a lot, but you know, I get a result that I needed. If you want to run 35s with little to no lift, Highlines are a great option. If you don't feel like building them, there are plenty of options out there for purchasing them. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel, and I will see you guys next time.